Thank you very much for being both Shelley and John, and that was an incredible task. I was thinking about some of the things that you've said, and it made me reflect back on the report that's been referenced from the World Health Organization. And I wrote a note to myself that only 11% of countries conduct survey on armed violence and what that means. Yet, when you were talking, I was thinking about the collective use of rape and sexual abuse as a way of control and a way of collectively creating fear and trauma. And I also was thinking about one of the takeaways from that report of the need to build and sustain community and build and sustain family. When we look at the age and the decreasing age of youth that are getting caught up in and becoming part of that collective response that we've learned in past workshops about, some of the mental health and the sense of belonging and how does that contagion happen. So I was just thinking of how the different workshops along the way have really brought together this issue of vulnerability, of allegiance, and how do we really get at what is creating this connection for people to involve in collective violence, and how do we address it? So I don't know if that's a statement or a question. You can take it either way, putting it out there, but certainly other statements or questions. I'll start with my friend and colleague, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I was just wondering what's happening in the prison system and whether with the high rate of incarceration of segments of the population, whether this is an area where preventative work needs to be done so that they don't get caught up in this movement.
I can't speak to everything that's going on. I know that the correction systems at the local, state, and federal level are actively engaged in the 77 fusion centers to share intelligence gained from corrections with other intelligence and enforcement agencies. So they play an active role in the nation's, here in the United States, in the nation's fusion systems. But I don't know about other nations.
I'm not sure if this is more of a comment than it would be a question, but I can't help but, especially being in Washington, D.C., and being at the Institute of Medicine, where we care about evidence-based practice, I'm personally very concerned as a forum member and as a citizen about the Senate Intelligence Report of the last few weeks, detailing information about our own Central Intelligence Agency, in my view, exporting a form of radicalization, violent extremism, lethal means of violence in its behavior regarding torture and everything related to torture. I don't expect us to drill down on this tough subject when we're right in the middle of trying to absorb this information in a formal way, but I think as a forum, and especially as an evidence-based institution, and especially because the evidence was an important thing that was gathered in this process, I just want to make a comment that I'm concerned about this, that we not in any way as a government export these forms of radicalization and violence ourselves. We hold ourselves up. This is a place to hold ourselves up to the highest standards that we're capable of as a country.
Thank you. Shelley, you cited a figure about the Somalis and the 40%, was it, that have some susceptibility to, I guess, radicalism. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Would you find a similar number in other immigrant communities? What distinguishes that community? What makes such a high fraction inclined in that respect? And is there anything we can do when we're accepting communities like that to be preventive?
I have to say I don't know, because based on the information I have from John, I can't speak to the sample uh, or even the purpose of the survey, just the outcome. There's a scale called the radicalism intention scale, and another one called the activism intention scale. And within that population, there were high scores on both, with a propensity toward radicalism and extremism. But I'm also very naive about those scales, so I don't know what that means. Again, I think the important point is, and this is where I just would have to bow to John, is that I don't think there's anything wrong with a propensity toward radicalism or extremism if it's well-directed and the parameters are set. There's nothing wrong with activism. I don't know if it indicates a propensity toward violence, and it doesn't say.
I would suggest it indicates that, they're certainly not pleased with their situation. And I'm wondering, do they arrive with that tendency, or do they develop it after they get here? And what is it that influences it after they get here? Are they in an environment that they are rejecting, or are they feeling very alienated, or I'm just curious.
Unfortunately, I don't know.
Just to add briefly to that, just more of a kind of a comment or thoughts for consideration. I know, Shelley, you don't have all the data or answers, but obviously it's extremely complex when you're thinking about the issues that drove people to the United States, obviously, for different reasons, and the influences that their homeland has on their propensity to want to be engaged back at home in the fights or the issues that are they become passionate about for different reasons. But yeah, it's extremely complex, and the what I would be also curious about is in that data of the scale that you mentioned for women and men. What would be the difference between women who were surveyed and their propensity towards engaging in violent activities? We know a lot less about women's involvement in violent extremism, and it's also something that's also worth exploring for preventative activities so that we can understand people's rationale.
Yes, and it doesn't break it down in the stuff John left. I also didn't have time to get into what we call, for lack of a better term, the individual joiner, someone who in his or her mind are going to act on behalf of a group that they think they are working on behalf of, but they're not actually part of a group. So they'll go out and commit an act of extremism or radicalism on behalf of a group that they've never been part of. And we see more of that here in the States than we talk about.
Thank you. I would just say, yeah, like understanding the different drivers. What is driving someone to be engaged in that in their home country or here in the United States?
Kathy, please.
To say, I think on Somalia, that's been a failed state for a long, long time. And I think that in this case, we can't underestimate the power of diasporas and the back and forth. So Somalis that are here also have links and are open to recruitment by those still in al-Shabaab. And that's very powerful. And some, groups, diasporas, have a much stronger pull. But I think that the Somalis that came here, a lot came. They came from a country that's fragmented, that is really, has a lot of tribal separations and things. And also, I think today we're facing a whole quest for identity. So those people that come here who don't really feel completely American, at least right away, they're searching for some kind of identity because the whole world has become a little more homogenized. And the more homogenized we are, the more everybody wears blue jeans. You know, there's the search among some people to have some kind of different identity. And I think that's what these radical movements are holding out. You know, come and let's make a caliphate and we'll all have an identity then.
So in 2011, I was part of a committee that put together a summit against violent extremism. And we took to Ireland over 80 former members of extremist groups from all walks of life, from all over the world. And so we looked at the front end of how they got in, why they got in, the processes by which, and we found a lot of similarities because that's what we focused on. Not so much on the differences because that often takes us nowhere. But I think, what really has not been done is what is the back end of things, those, kids that do survive, or the ones, that just went through a phase, or that somehow became disenchanted with the process. This is not what I signed up for. So I think more importantly, if there is any type of focus, it should be on that. Just like there is a recruitment process or people go and seek out these groups, in the same way that they are ushered in, they also have to be ushered out. And I think that is a much more important conversation.
I agree. And one of the pieces that I was not able to find, given that I only had a couple of hours, how many people are recruited into these groups, particularly young people, that choose not to join? And why is it they chose not to join? And I think we could learn an awful lot, just a ton on how to deal with it. Please, go ahead.
We included the sisters in this summit, and it was also a very important conversation. What are these factors, these resilient factors? Kids that grow up in gang-infested neighborhoods, kids that also, as the lady mentioned, have issues, with identity or grievances in their community or with their state or religion or whatever. So again, it is really about how do we help these folks survive. And there are examples around the world. I don't know if you've heard of Exit Sweden. They mainly focus on white supremacists, and they help them. And these are former members of those groups that help go in and recruit people out of that movement. And I think that's, where there's a lot of research lacking and there's a lot of potential there.
I think I just have, I was thinking about rule of law in terms of what does exist, or again, going back to the WHO report, the poor level rule of law. And I'm just wondering, I can open it to you, Shelley, as well as others, of how might that support or not support collective violence?
It's a complicated issue because, again, there's no law against extremism. There's no law against radicalism. And I don't know that there ever should be, because extremism and radicalism that's well placed and well organized can affect positive change within a community. One of the dilemmas here, if you talk to people in enforcement, is that they can only engage after a criminal act has been committed. And the criminal act itself has nothing to do with the extremism or the radicalism. So it may be a homicide, a bombing, an arson, or that's what law enforcement can respond to. They can't respond to the drivers of the arson or the homicide.
I was thinking about that in terms of rule of law and collective thinking. I was thinking about this past year and the anti-homosexuality efforts and laws and bills in Russia, in Nigeria, in Uganda, and how the lack of protective laws or the implementation of punitive laws created, in my sense, a different level of collective violence, not one necessarily measured by use of weaponry, but guns, but by use of fear and oppression. And so I was really thinking of teasing that out a little bit more of what does it mean to have a culture or community that doesn't have protective laws or implements laws that in them of themselves create an inequality. So just something for me to think about in terms of how sometimes what we don't have can support the use of violence. Any other? I think I have one more. Elizabeth, are you done, or you're good? Okay. Thank you very much for your
Oh, yeah.
time. Really appreciate. Thank you, Shelley.